Hello, and thank you for watching our presentation on social annotation, making reading visible and thinking collaborative. My name is Chris Andrews. I'm a PhD candidate at Indiana University, and my co-presenters are Grant Chartrand, also from Indiana University, and Remi Kalir from the University of Colorado, Denver. In this presentation, we'll briefly talk about some ways that you can use social annotation in the teacher education classroom for collaborative learning. Research shows various benefits of social annotation. It can improve students' reading strategies and comprehension, develop students' cognitive and metacognitive abilities, motivate student learning and engagement in the readings, and students also have a favorable view of annotation activities. One particular benefit where our own experiences and work has centered on is on how social annotation affords students the opportunity to connect their own ideas and ideas from other settings or experiences they've had in other settings directly on top of course content. In terms of teacher education, social annotation enables pre-service teachers to layer imagined futures, such as their future teaching practice, directly on top of course content. This is related to the idea of intertextuality, where multiple layers of ideas and texts interact and support learning of course content. And in other words, annotation transforms texts as a mediating object, a learning object that students just read, and often in isolation, into a mediating experience, a context, a space, a situation for collaborative learning. We're not going to dig into this too much in this presentation, but there are some citations listed that you can look at. Now I'm going to toss it over to Grant for the next section.
Before we discuss a few ways that we've used social annotation in the teacher education classroom, we want to briefly point out that technology and tools by themselves are not transformative. We want to emphasize that purposes and practices endure and that technology and tools do not. Technology and tools can become obsolete. We will talk about two tools, Hypothesis and Google Docs, but we want to recognize that identifying the purposes and practices for using social annotation should precede selecting any particular tool. As instructors, we ask ourselves, what purpose are we trying to meet? What practices are we trying to get students to take up? We feel that social annotation has been really helpful for us in our teacher education classrooms. The first social annotation activity that we present to you is an activity called Annotating the Syllabus. This is a great low-stakes introductory activity. When students annotate the syllabus, it helps them make sense of what will happen in the course. This also invites students to be co-constructors of their learning. There are many more examples of what annotating the syllabus might do for you and for your students. And you can read more about this on Remi's blog at the URL at the bottom of the slide. You can also search the hashtag annotated syllabus on Twitter to see how others have approached this activity and the kinds of wonderful things they've learned. The example on the right is using the annotation tool Hypothesis, but you could also annotate using Google Drive, either by having your students annotate the syllabus as a Google Doc or as a PDF hosted in Google Drive.
One of the major activities that we use social annotation for is moving our course discussions onto the text itself. This allows students to make posts that are about something because they're tied or anchored to a specific portion of the reading. This also makes reading visible and thinking collaborative, as the subtitle of our presentation said. It turns the act of reading into a social activity instead of one that we just do in isolation. Questions can be asked and answered as students are in the reading or are doing the reading, kind of in the moment. Even though it's asynchronous, they can ask that question in the moment. And sometimes the answers can come quickly depending on when other students are also annotating. So social annotation turns the reading into a conversation, not just between student and teacher, but between students as well. Now, one benefit of introducing social annotation on course readings that we have found, at least anecdotally, is that students are more likely to engage in the readings. In other words, accountability to read is kind of built into the activity in a more natural way, rather than other attempts at accountability, which often invoke more of a sense of surveillance or compliance. So if you scaffold the annotation activity well, students read in order to learn the content and contribute towards shared understanding with their peers. And as we mentioned before, students tend to enjoy the annotated readings as well. Now, Grant is going to talk a little bit more about scaffolding students' participation and some tips for how the instructor might participate in the annotations as well.
Before we introduce two more annotation possibilities, we want to also mention a few ways that we have scaffolded and supported students as they think collaboratively in the annotations. This is obviously not a comprehensive list, but some ideas to get you started. One important idea is to remind students of the goal for annotating. If students do not understand why they are annotating, the annotations can become less productive. In our courses, Chris and I have reminded students to think and annotate in relation to their own content areas, and to comment on how relevant or not certain concepts in the reading are for their own content areas. We also remind our students about how their annotations will help them as they prepare for future activities within the course. Another great way to scaffold students' participation in the annotation is to seed the text with annotations. You seed the text by making annotations throughout, such as identifying parts of the text that you want them to focus on, questions you want them to consider, and asking them to connect ideas from the text to their prior experiences as well as any perceived or imagined future contexts. This can be an opportunity to provide definitions, connections to other texts, or provide background information right within the text. Finally, another way we scaffolded students' participation was by directing them to key conversations taking place within the annotations. We've done this by sending out emails or making announcements in our LMS to let students know which annotations were important for them to look at. This highlights student interactions in the annotations and provides a model for how they should be engaging in the annotations. We want to further discuss our views of the instructor's role in social annotation. There are many ways you can engage with the annotations. Here are some that we've identified as being useful in our experience. Model productive interaction. We try to model how we want or expect students to engage with course content, each other, and their own thoughts. Annotate like how you want them to annotate. For example, you can start an annotation by explaining how you, as the instructor, connect the content to your experiences. Students will see how you discuss the text's relevance to you as an instructor. Extending students' thinking. We try not to insert our views within student annotations, but we try to ask students questions to get them to think deeper. We can help students elaborate on their ideas, take ownership of the content, and position them as co-constructors of knowledge. Throughout the annotations, we position students as having valuable experiences and knowledge. We do this by recognizing and valuing students' connections between the text they're annotating and their own personal backgrounds and experiences, their funds of knowledge. We also help students to consider future applications of the content. For pre- and in-service teachers, this could be thinking about how their future or current classrooms could look like. These are some examples of how instructors can support student sense-making. Next, Remi will talk about marginal syllabus and crowd layers.
Greetings. My name is Remi Kalir. I'm an assistant professor of learning design and technology at the University of Colorado in Denver. And during the 2020-2021 academic year, I'm also serving as scholar in residence with the social annotation organization Hypothesis. Now, I'm here to briefly describe two important projects that really exemplify the relationship between social annotation and learning. The first is the Marginal Syllabus Project. Since 2016, the Marginal Syllabus has sparked and sustained public conversation about educational equity using collaborative technologies and through collaborative partnerships. Now, over 4 years later, the Marginal Syllabus is a multi-stakeholder research practice partnership that engages communities associated with the National Writing Project, NCTE, the National Council of Teachers of English, and again, the annotation organization Hypothesis. Briefly, educators, whether they're engaging openly on the web or using these resources in the context of a classroom, read articles about educational equity and discuss their relevance to their professional practice. If you click on the Marginal Syllabus link embedded in this slide, you can get access to 5 curated syllabi with many texts featuring both public and, in some cases, private annotations from 2016 through 2020, alongside open access Again, media, author webinars, blog posts, our research, as well as information about our partnerships and additional teaching resources. Highly recommend you adapting this project to your teacher education and broadly literacy education contexts. I also want to briefly mention a project that has grown out of the marginal syllabus and is responsive to the increasing use of social annotation on the open web. This is the Crowd Layers dashboard. Yes, that's a very long, jargony academic acronym, but basically, if a document, whether it's public on the web, as a news article, a blog post, a PDF, whatever it may be, if it's being annotated publicly and also privately in a context of a group or in the context of a class, someone, you, an educator, your students, can gain access to the social learning analytics associated with your collaborative annotation. This, of course, supports, again, activity on the open web as well as private groups. This is a free tool that you can use today to make sense of texts that groups are reading and annotating together. Again, you can follow the link under the Crowd Layers name to learn more about and ultimately begin using this resource.
All right, thank you for, again, watching this presentation on social annotation. We hope that you found it useful. Please reach out to us if you're interested in collaborating or understanding more about social annotation. And you can also check out our websites for other content around social annotation. Remi in particular has done a lot of work and a lot of writing around social annotation and has some good resources there. So. We've also posted the references from earlier in the presentation for those that are interested. And thank you.